So now let's look at the center panel here. This is basically all around the engines and and flaps and auto brake and fuel quantity. That's the main stuff that you have here. But let's go one by one. First of all, we have a standby attitude indicator here. Normally you can press this and there's a test thing that then happens. This is just sort of a standby instrument that helps you in case you have a problem with your main instruments. The thing is, we have a standby instrument for the attitude indicator. We have one for the altimeter, which is here. And I'm just trying to see what about indicated airspeed. Apparently we don't have one for indicated airspeed. Okay. Doesn't look like it. At least I haven't seen one. Right. Below here is the fuel quantity. Now just be aware, if you have switched to kilograms, these instruments will not switch. That means if you, let's say, have like here, we have, what's our current weight? Let's check. Our current fuel is, total fuel is 9.07 tons, so it's about 4.5 tons per wing tank and a little bit in the middle. And you see it doesn't show 4 here, it actually shows more like 9, and that would be the double, and that's roughly because pounds to kilogram is not exactly 2, it's just a simplification if you say it's 2 pounds to the kilogram, but it's somewhere in this area, and therefore the numbers are too high here, so you will have to kind of recalculate your actual fuel weight, your remaining fuel weight, by calculating from pounds back to kilograms. That's for all 3 tanks. If you press the test button, you will see a test. Yeah. This is the speed brake armed light. This is the speed brake do not arm. That means if it isn't able to arm the speed brake, this yellow light will come on. And here we have the stabilizer out of trim light. That is when, for some reason, the stabilizer is on extreme positions. And for example, if it's down here by 0, it's out of trim. It will not be able to trim further up. It's at some point on this trend, if there is a trend that it moves up and up and up and up, or down and down and down and down, it will come up with this light, because that is indicating there is a problem probably with the autopilot and with or also with the attitude of your aircraft speed, possibly too, because it's trying to compensate by trimming and trimming and trimming and trimming it into a unsavory situation. So that's when this stop out of trim comes up. So here we have the 2 engine columns. Up here is, by the way, in speed brake tests, these are not coded, so there's nothing happening when you press here, but normally there would be some kind of speed brake test ongoing. So we have now 2 engines, not 3, showing you the exhaust pressure ratio reference. That's actually the main value that I watch when I fly. We have JT8D15A engines in this aircraft, and the EPA value is basically what gets calculated by the speed tape. See it up here, normal EPA 2.15, and when you set the bucks, it will actually modify also this buck to show 2.15. That's actually quite nice. I really like this feature. So my experience is at the moment, so you will, when you're up in the air, when you're at let's say at your cruising level, somewhere between 1.2 is probably a little bit too low, but somewhere between 1.3 and 1.4 EPA will kind of hold your speed. This isn't a set and fast, set and stone kind of stone hard thing, but roughly in this area you will keep your speed when you are level. Takeoff is usually around 2.10 to 2 point something, 2.20 EPR, depends a little bit on the conditions and so on. So somewhere around here is the EPR value for takeoff. And you use the bug, not because the system will actually fix itself on the bug because you don't have an auto throttle. You will need to maintain the EPR value yourself by watching where the needle goes and trying to kind of squeeze the thrust levers so that on takeoff you are in and about this EPR setting. And you can stay on this EPR setting during the takeoff for quite some time. So here's the N1 tachometer. That's basically the low pressure compressor. In these engines you have two compressors. You have a high pressure and a low pressure compressor, and percentage of rotor speed is expressed as N1, and for the high pressure one it's N2. So that's an indication for the power that is put on. I don't want to go into this deeply, but these are all indications of how much power you're actually producing. During flight I use mainly the EPR setting. This is the exhaust gas temperature. The EXH indication, it's degrees multiplied by 100 centigrade. This is percentage of RPM, so it's not the actual RPM, but there's a certain value which is the 100% mark. You should not exceed. You see where the green band is, so the airplane should not be flown with over 100% or actually going into the red area. It is possible to potentially get more out of the engines, but that's a dangerous area. It will probably damage your engine if you are using this too long. So normally you should stay well in the green band with all your flight maneuvers. The same is for the exhaust gas temperature. Everything that is at or above the red one is not good. Yeah, the yellow is already okay, you can use it, but don't do it too long. The green area is fine, and the same is for the N2. Down here you have the fuel flow, and that gives you the fuel flow. Don't forget it's pound per hours, so again for rough kilogram calculations, take the value and divide it by 2, gives you a rough indication of how much fuel you're actually using. Okay. So then here we have the oil quantity in gallons. So these tanks, or these oil tanks, are quite normally filled, so no problem here. This is the oil temperature. Again, as with everything, it should stay in the green. If it goes into the yellow or the red, then something is definitely wrong. And then we have here the oil pressure in PSI. So again, oil pressure shouldn't be too low and it shouldn't be too high for the engines to run properly and without problems. We should be again in the green band. It shouldn't really go into the yellow here. The yellow in this case means we don't have enough oil pressure. It's still flyable, but it's already getting dangerous. You shouldn't really be having such a low oil pressure because it can damage the engines. And the lower it gets, as you can see as the red marker, you shouldn't really be there, or you'll be in trouble with your engines very quickly. Okay, so that's these here, and then there's a number of indicators. This will come up when the reversers are unlocked. It will happen when you're on the ground and you move your throttles into the reverse position by pulling these two levers here. See? So these are the reverse levers, and I've pulled them up now. Then these lights will come on. The start valve open, you will see this when you start the engine. The low oil pressure is because our oil pressure indicator is currently at 0. We don't have running engines, that's why. And the oil filter bypass, that's I'm not quite sure why we get this indication, but that's something that we can look up if you're interested. This is the flaps indicator. It actually shows both sides, right and left, and ideally you do not have a discrepancy between these two needles. So if one of them goes to 5 and the other one gets kind of stuck somewhere in between, then you know that you have some problem probably with the hydraulics or with your flaps or whatever. In other aircraft you have one needle here which shows the symmetric movement of the flaps. There's, by the way, another indicator up here that also gives you an indication whether or not, for example, flaps are in transit, and if they are extended, fully extended, you know, you will see these, and including the slats which are at the front of the wing. Okay. So, and that more or less almost finishes. We are not quite through. Just this is the anti-skid. In this case, you don't turn these off. You leave these as they are. Don't touch them. This is the auto brake. There's also an auto brake disarm that will come on. Just note, the auto brake is just for auto braking. There is no RTO, no rejected takeoff setting. Okay. So my understanding is for takeoff we leave it in the off position, and when we have to abort, then we're going to use our feet and hauen den Stachel rein, as we say in German. Okay, this is the gear lever. It works like any other Boeing gear lever. You can bring it up. You shouldn't do this on the ground, obviously. You can bring it down. And if you have brought it up, by clicking on it, you can bring it into the off position, which you should do with Boeings. Okay. And obviously, this is just clicking. There's no pulling action as you would normally do, because you have to normally pull it out a bit, and then you can move the gear lever. Below here is the landing gear limits, operating, extend 270 or Mach 0.82. This is sort of the maximum indicated airspeed that you can operate the gear. Yeah, you should have retracted it by 235 knots, and extended. They can. The gears can be up to 320 km. Really, 320 knots? That fast? Okay, now hang on. No. Extended, yeah. You can fly up to 320 knots with the extended gear when it's out already, but when it's operating, that means when you pull it in or bring it out, extend or retract, there are limits. You have to retract them by 235 knots, so just see that you don't forget it. And you can extend it not above 270 km, so you should not start having the gear move, because they are weaker when they are in movement, because once they are extended they are locked and latched sort of, so that they cannot move. But while they are extending, if you have higher speeds, you might actually damage the mechanism, and that's not a good thing to happen in flight. The flaps limits are a little bit lower. You can see that flaps 1 maximum 230 km, the same knots. The second position, flaps 2, which in the Boeings is not used that often, although in this one it's always suggested as the takeoff flap. Flaps 5 to 225, flaps 10 maximum 210 knots, flaps 15 195, flaps 25 190, flaps 30 maximum 185, and flaps 40 you have to be below 170 knots. Yeah. The alternate flap extend up to 210 knots. So that's the speeds for the flaps. And that finishes the first part of the cockpit familiarization, and we've been looking here at this main panel. Next we're going to look at the pedestal here, and we're also going to have a look at the overhead, and I will run you through the systems there.